It wasn't the kind of morning you pack up your whole life. The wind was sharp, not cruel, just impatient, like it was waiting for someone to make a decision already. Evelyn stood in the parking lot behind her building, the cuffs of her coat brushing against the edges of a weathered moving blanket. She wasn't young. Her knees said so every time she bent to lift something heavier than a memory. And yet here she was, strapping down a piano, not a keyboard, a real upright, scratched, walnut brown, keys a little yellowed, middle C slightly flat. It had taken 3 neighbors and a favor from the super just to get it down the elevator. But Evelyn had said she could take it from there. No one argued. There was something in her voice that morning that said, "Let me do this one thing myself." A boy passing by on a scooter paused. "Are you moving, ma'am?" Evelyn looked up. Wind teased a strand of gray hair out from under her knit cap. "Just going where the music goes," she said. Then she tightened the last strap. There was no crowd, no goodbye. Just the click of a latch and the groan of an old van door as she pulled it shut. The back seat was already packed. A thermos, a worn notebook, a folded photo of someone who might have once been family. She slid into the driver's seat and didn't even check the rearview mirror. She had no address, just a note scribbled in pencil on the back of a grocery list. Help needed. Must be patient. No experience required. Children involved. No name. No phone number. Just a town. A place she hadn't been to in years. Most people would have thrown it away. Evelyn folded it twice and tucked it into the back of her piano bench like it was something sacred. As she pulled out onto the road, the wind picked up behind her, brushing against the side of the van like a dog chasing a friend it hadn't seen in a long time. The city fell behind, slowly, as if it knew it wasn't welcome in this next part of her life. Stoplights turned into trees, billboards faded into sky, her hand stayed steady on the wheel. At a gas station near the county line, a woman behind the counter asked, "Where you headed?" Evelyn didn't look up from counting exact change. "North, toward the water." "Family there?" Evelyn paused, then smiled softly. "Not yet." Back on the road, the sun began to lower. The radio didn't work, but she didn't need it. She hummed instead, something simple, a lullaby without words, the same one she used to play late at night when no one else was listening. The van creaked. The piano shifted slightly in the back. Evelyn didn't flinch. She kept driving, not away from anything, but towards something. She just didn't know what it was yet. By the time Evelyn turned off the last gravel road, dusk had crept in. The kind of dusk that doesn't ask for permission. It just takes the sky and makes it blue-gray and tired. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the bluff, white paint flaking, window panes dim with salt. The beacon above still blinked, slow and steady, as if it didn't know how to stop even when no one was watching. Evelyn parked the van by the fence. No sign, no welcome mat, just the hum of wind and the sea below, restless and distant. She climbed out, her coat tighter now in the cold. The ground was uneven, grass wild. She took 2 slow steps toward the house beside the tower. Then she knocked. No answer. She knocked again, a firmer sound this time. Nothing. Finally, the door creaked open just a few inches and a man stepped into the light. Late 50s, maybe older. Broad shoulders that had seen hard work, hands still holding a towel as if she'd interrupted something. He looked at her like a question, not unfriendly, just uncertain. "I'm Evelyn," she said. "I came about the children." His brow furrowed. "What children?" She blinked. There was a note, posted somewhere online. Said help needed, no experience, kids involved. He glanced behind her at the van. "You came all this way for that?" Evelyn shrugged gently. "Felt like the kind of thing worth driving for." Silence stretched between them like a rope. "I didn't post anything," he said. "But the oldest might have. She's clever like that." A small voice called from inside. Then another. Someone coughed. The the sound of bare feet on wooden floors. He stepped aside without a word. Evelyn nodded, as if that was all the invitation she needed. Inside was warm but worn. Floorboards groaned. The walls smelled faintly of salt and something roasted vegetables, maybe, long forgotten in the oven. A narrow hallway opened into a living room with mismatched chairs and a low bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks. In the corner, 6 pairs of shoes, different sizes, lined up like they'd been told to behave. "Name's Jonas," the man said, rubbing his hands on the towel. "These are my grandkids. Their mother passed. Their dad left earlier." Evelyn didn't flinch. Loss had a certain tone to it. She recognized it immediately. "I didn't come to fix anything," she said softly. "I just brought supper and a piano." Jonas raised one eyebrow. "Piano?" "It's in the van." He let out something between a laugh and a sigh. "We don't have room for a piano." "You don't have to. I do." He studied her a moment longer. "You plan on staying?" "I didn't plan anything, but I'll sleep in the van if that makes it easier." Jonas looked toward the hallway where the faint sound of dishes clinking came from a kitchen too quiet for 6 children. "Guest room's upstairs," he said finally. "Door sticks on the left." Evelyn smiled. "Noted." As she turned to fetch her bag, one of the children peeked from the staircase. A girl, maybe 9, eyes dark and wide. She didn't say a word. Neither did Evelyn. But she nodded just once, and in return the girl did something that mattered more than a greeting. She didn't run. The kitchen smelled faintly of thyme and something overcooked. Evelyn stood near the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot that wasn't hers. She hadn't asked. She had simply seen what needed doing and moved. Jonas sat at the table, elbows on wood rubbed smooth by decades of hands. He didn't speak, just watched. Not with suspicion, but something like caution wrapped in fatigue. The children emerged one by one. No rush, no chatter. Just a quiet procession of small bodies finding chairs. 6 in all. The youngest, barely 5, had curls that framed her face like question marks. She didn't look up. The oldest, perhaps 12, passed out plates like a soldier on duty. No one argued. No one smiled. Evelyn ladled stew into each bowl, careful not to splash. Her hands knew this motion. They remembered family, even if her memory tried not to. "Thank you," said one boy softly. Evelyn nodded. They ate mostly in silence. Spoons clinked against ceramic. Somewhere a draft whistled through the wall. It wasn't an awkward silence, just one that had forgotten how to fill itself. Halfway through the meal, Mira, the littlest, dropped her spoon. It hit the floor and rolled under the stove. Evelyn crouched to fetch it. When she looked up, Mira's eyes were on her. Not scared, just searching. "Here you go, sweetheart." Mira took the spoon without speaking, but her fingers brushed Evelyn's just a second longer than needed. After dinner, Evelyn washed dishes at the sink while the others disappeared, some upstairs, some to corners of the house like shadows returning to familiar walls. Jonas brought a stack of cups to the counter. "You didn't have to cook." "I didn't," she said, rinsing a ladle. "I just stirred what was already there." He didn't respond, but he stayed a minute longer before heading out onto the porch. When the house settled into its nighttime hush, Evelyn opened the back of her van. The cold reached in like a warning. She ignored it. With slow, practiced care, she unstrapped the piano and checked the legs. Nothing cracked, nothing broken, still hers. She closed the van doors, came back inside, and ran her fingers along the keys. A low hum rang out, tentative, unassuming. She didn't play a song, just notes, soft ones, like testing the air to see if it could still carry music. From the staircase, Mira watched, barefoot, blanket clutched in one hand, thumb in her mouth. She didn't say a word, she didn't move, but she listened. Evelyn knew. She didn't look directly at the girl, only enough to be certain she was there. Then she kept playing, simple notes, a lullaby with no words. Mira stepped down one stair, then another, then stopped. At the bottom she sat cross-legged, her blanket pooling around her like a question waiting to be answered. When the melody faded, Evelyn rested her hands on her lap and looked toward her. "You like music?" she asked, voice barely above the crackle of the wood stove. Mira nodded. "Me too," Evelyn whispered. She didn't ask anything more, and Mira didn't offer. But that night, when Evelyn climbed into bed in the tiny guest room upstairs, she found a small drawing folded under her pillow. A piano, and two stick figures. One tall, one small. No names, no words, just music. The next morning broke slow, with pale sun smeared across a gray sky. Seagulls called in the distance like something old and tired trying to remember a song. Evelyn came down before anyone else. She moved through the kitchen like someone who knew not to make noise where grief might still be sleeping. She lit the stove, boiled water, found the tea bags buried in a tin behind mismatched mugs. She didn't ask. She just did. Jonas came in later, scratching his beard and smelling faintly of salt and wood smoke. "You're up early?" he said, voice rough from sleep. "I've always been an early riser," Evelyn replied, setting a mug in front of him. He stared at it like it might ask him to feel something. Then he drank. They didn't talk much after that, but she noticed how he didn't leave the kitchen right away either. By mid-morning, the house had woken. Two of the girls argued over a book. The boy spilled cereal and tried to hide the evidence under a towel. Mira didn't speak, but followed Evelyn from room to room like a whisper with legs. Evelyn fixed a loose hinge on a cabinet door. She swept dust from corners no one had looked at in months. She peeled potatoes in the afternoon while the youngest colored at the table. At one point, the oldest girl, Grace, stood in the doorway and asked, "Why are you still here?" Evelyn looked up from the sink. "I said I'd stay a few days if that's all right." Grace shrugged. "No one's ever stayed that long before." "That's so." The girl nodded once, then disappeared. That night, Evelyn folded towels, reheated leftover stew, and tucked a blanket around Mira without saying a word. Jonas leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed. "You said a few days?" "Yes. And then? I suppose I'll see." "You looking for work?" "No," she said, turning off the kitchen light. "Just looking for somewhere that still wants music." He didn't respond. But the next morning, Evelyn found a screwdriver and a jar of nails left on the counter. A quiet offer of tools, or maybe trust. By the third day, the piano had been moved inside, no one remembered how. One morning, it simply sat in the corner of the front room as if the house had decided on its own to make space for it. Later, one of the children said they'd seen Jonas out early, clearing the entryway with an old dolly from the shed. Evelyn didn't mention it. She just dusted the keys and tuned the D string. On the fourth night, Grace spoke again. "You're not like the others." Evelyn looked over the rim of her teacup. "What others?" "The ones who came before. Dad hired them, or tried to. They left before winter. I didn't come for money." "Then why?" Evelyn stirred her tea. The spoon clinked gently against ceramic, "Because I knew what it felt like when someone left without saying goodbye." Grace didn't reply, but she sat down at the table and began peeling an orange, slow and careful. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Jonas walked into the living room and stood by the piano. "You play?" he said. Evelyn nodded. "Used to be music here, before." "I figured. I didn't think they missed it." "They didn't forget it either." Jonas looked at the keys. They glowed faintly in the lamplight. I don't know if we're the kind of place people stay. Evelyn leaned back in the armchair. Maybe you don't have to be that kind of place, just the kind someone returns to. He didn't say anything more, but when he turned to go, he left the door to the porch open behind him, like he thought she might still be there playing when he came back. The wind had picked up that morning. Not a storm, just enough to rattle the loose pane in the hallway window and make the floorboards groan louder than usual. Evelyn was mopping near the wood stove when Jonas passed by, shrugging on his heavy coat. He had a hammer in one hand and a half-empty mug of coffee in the other. She stepped aside to let him through. He didn't say much. He rarely did in the mornings, but nodded once in her direction before heading out toward the shed. Something dropped from his coat pocket as he passed the front door. He didn't notice, but Evelyn did. It was a handkerchief soft from years of use, once white but now closer to the color of overwashed linen. A name was stitched faintly into the edge. Anna. The thread had faded to pale blue. A corner had torn loose, hanging like a threadbare memory. Evelyn didn't call after him. She just bent down, picked it up, folded it, and held it in her palm for a long moment. Later, when the house quieted and the youngest were busy stacking wooden blocks into leaning towers, Evelyn sat by the kitchen window with a small sewing kit she'd kept since Boston. She didn't match the thread. There were a dozen blues in the box, but none quite right. So she chose a soft gold, not because it blended, but because it didn't. Because some things should show their mending. Each stitch was slow, careful, not perfect. When she finished, she refolded the cloth the way nurses used to in the war-crisp corner's soft center and set it gently on the entryway table near the door. She didn't leave a note. Jonas came in near sunset. His boots were muddy, his jacket dusted with sawdust. He didn't speak when he walked past the table. Didn't stop. But an hour later, when Evelyn came back through the hallway to fetch more firewood, the handkerchief was gone. That night, after the dishes were dry and the younger kids tucked in, Evelyn was finishing a quiet tune on the piano when she heard a voice behind her. "You fixed it." Jonas stood in the archway, arms crossed. She turned slightly. "It was fraying." "I hadn't noticed." "You did. You just didn't want to." He said nothing. She closed the piano lid slowly. "I didn't want to hide the repair." "I saw that," he said. "Gold thread." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've learned not everything needs to be invisible to be okay." He looked away toward the window where the lighthouse beam swung silently over the cliffs. "She stitched it before chemo took her strength," he said. "Sat in that chair over there sewing like her hands weren't shaking." Evelyn let the silence sit. Some stories come best after the weight of them settles. "She used to say," Jonas continued, voice lower now, "that mending things gave her peace. Said if she couldn't fix what was broken in herself, she'd start with sleeves." Evelyn nodded once. "She'd like the gold thread," he said after a while. "I hope so." He looked at her just briefly, and there was something almost unguarded in the way he stood. Then, as quietly as he'd entered, he turned and went upstairs. Evelyn stayed by the piano a moment longer, her fingers resting on the wood, still warm from the last note. Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, something else had started to breathe again. The second week came without announcement. Evelyn had long stopped counting days. Each evening, after the dishes were put away and the house dipped into its quiet rhythm of bedtime books and whispered goodnights, Evelyn would sit at the piano. She never played full songs. Instead, she drifted. She let her fingers wander along the keys like they were finding memories instead of melodies. Some nights she played scales soft and slow like she was tuning the air. Other times it was fragments of lullabies or the start of something she never quite finished. She never looked behind her. But she always knew she wasn't alone. At first it was just a creak on the stairs, a shadow near the edge of the hallway, the soft rustle of a blanket being carried by small hands. Mira never spoke, but she came, every night. Sometimes Evelyn caught her reflection in the dusty window glass, just a girl and her blanket perched near the door frame like a bird deciding whether to land. Evelyn didn't beckon, she didn't offer comfort, she just played. One evening, as the house settled deeper into silence, Evelyn heard something unusual, a note, one she hadn't touched. She paused, let the air hold still, then another, not clumsy, not random, just small, deliberate. She didn't turn her head. She didn't breathe too loud. Somewhere one of the lower keys was pressed, then lifted, then another. Evelyn placed her hands in her lap. She let the child feel the sound, feel the space. Mira didn't know she was allowed, so Evelyn didn't interrupt the illusion. The next night, Evelyn left the piano lid open and the bench just slightly pushed back. She sat beside it with her tea, pretending to read a book. Mira came in slower this time, not just watching, lingering. She climbed onto the bench without a word. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Her fingers hovered above the keys like someone standing at the edge of a frozen lake. She pressed one, waited, pressed another. No pattern, but no fear either. Evelyn watched from her chair. She didn't say anything. When Mira finished, she slid down and padded back to the stairs. Only at the top step did she pause and whisper, not to Evelyn, but to the space around her. "I like the black ones better. They sound sadder." Then she was gone. Evelyn smiled into her teacup. The following night, Evelyn returned to the piano and found something new. A single seashell, placed on middle C. Tiny, pink-edged, worn smooth, no name, just placed there with the kind of care only children understand. Evelyn left it there, and when she played, she adjusted for the weight of it, letting that one note stay quiet, because sometimes not being touched is part of the song, too. The tide was low that afternoon. The sky hung like a wrinkled sheet above the cliffs, soft gray and waiting. The older children were outside near the edge of the bluff, where the grass gave way to stone. Evelyn watched them from the porch, not hovering, just present. She was snapping green beans into a bowl, her chair tilted slightly backward, the way older people sit when they don't need to rush anything. They weren't loud. That house didn't raise noisy kids. Grief had trained them early in the language of restraint. Even their play was careful, like they were testing the boundaries of joy before using it too freely. Then a cry rang out, not dramatic, not life-threatening, but sharp, sudden, the kind of sound that made every bird within 100 feet lift its head. Evelyn was up before the second note left the child's throat. She didn't run. She didn't call out. She just walked. By the time she reached the slope, she could see the scene. One of the middle boys, Leo, cradling his arm, face scrunched not in panic but in shame. He'd fallen, a knee torn open just enough to bleed, dirt streaked down one shin, elbow scraped raw. The other children stood around him like statues, wide-eyed and frozen. Grace, the oldest, had gone pale. "He's fine," she said quickly. "It's nothing." Evelyn didn't answer. She crouched beside Leo, slow, careful, knees cracking with age but not complaint. "Let me see." Leo didn't resist, but he didn't meet her eyes either. "It stings," he muttered. "Most things worth healing do," she replied. She took a handkerchief from her pocket, this one stitched with green thread, initials too faded to read, and began cleaning the wound. Her hands didn't shake, she didn't wince. "Got some gravel in there," she said softly. "We'll rinse it out back at the house, maybe even wrap it in something a little heroic-looking. Bandages can be brave too, you know." Leo sniffed, eyes darting to Grace, who nodded as if giving him permission to feel what he felt. Evelyn stood. "Can you walk?" He nodded, stood slowly. She didn't touch him, just walked alongside. The others followed without being told. Back in the kitchen, Evelyn set Leo on a stool, washed his knee with warm water, dabbed on antiseptic without ceremony, and wrapped it in gauze. "There," she said, tying the ends with a neat knot. "Now you look like someone who won a small battle." Leo smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Later, as Evelyn rinsed the cloth and folded it over the sink, Jonas appeared in the doorway. "He fall?" Evelyn nodded. "Scraped his pride more than his leg." Jonas crossed his arms. "You didn't call for me." "I didn't need to." "You didn't panic. Didn't seem helpful." He studied her a moment. Anna would have cried louder than the kid. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm not Anna." "No," Jonas said, "but he let you clean him up. That's something." She didn't reply. But that evening, Leo brought her a glass of water without being asked, set it beside her piano bench, nodded once, and walked away. No thank you, no words, just acknowledgement, and sometimes that's where trust begins. The house had settled into its usual hush, wind against the shutters, faint creak of wood as the old structure breathed. From the living room, the steady tick of the wall clock counted the kind of minutes no one rushes through. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table threading a needle. A pair of socks needed mending. Not hers, she didn't know whose. It didn't matter. Jonas entered quietly. He didn't sit, just poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee from the pot that had been left on too long. He stood there a moment, then spoke without looking at her. Anna hated silence. Evelyn didn't look up. Some people do. She filled every room, music, talking, humming. If she wasn't speaking, she was cooking, or moving furniture around, or singing songs the kids didn't even know the words to. She sounds like someone who didn't like space going unused. He chuckled once, bitter but soft. She said silence made her think too much, that quiet was where the bad thoughts lived. Evelyn paused in her stitching, let the thread dangle. "What about you?" Jonas took a long sip. "I didn't mind it, still don't." She glanced up. "Yet here we are." He met her eyes just briefly. "She died fast," he said. "Faster than they told us. Faster than I was ready for. It was supposed to be months, maybe a year." Evelyn didn't flinch, just waited. One morning she got out of bed and said she couldn't smell the coffee. She laughed about it. Thought it was allergies. That was the last time she made a joke. Silence returned, but not the sharp kind, the kind that lets breath slow down. Evelyn picked up the sock again, began stitching. "I had a sister," she said after a while. "Nora, she raised me more than our parents did. We were both stubborn, both bad at goodbyes." She pulled the needle through. "She had a boy, Ben. He used to tap on every surface like it was a drum set. Kitchen chairs, cereal boxes, his own knees. Couldn't keep rhythm to save his life." Jonas didn't move, just listened. "They were hit by a delivery truck. Winter storm. I was supposed to pick them up that day. I was late. Traffic, work, doesn't matter now." She finished the seam, tied a knot, and set the sock aside. "That was 10 years ago. I haven't played a real piece since." Jonas looked toward the living room where the piano sat still, upright, waiting. "You play every night." "Not pieces," she said, "just fragments. Nothing that begins or ends. That way I don't have to stop." The clock ticked on. Jonas stepped forward, set his mug down. "You ever get tired of starting over?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "No, but I get tired of doing it alone." He nodded. That was all. But it was enough. They sat in the kitchen, the two of them, not saying anything else. Not because there was nothing left, but because they'd said exactly what they needed. No more, no less. The morning came slow, wrapped in fog and the hush of sea air too tired to move. The lighthouse beacon had shut itself off hours ago, but its rhythm still seemed to pulse faintly through the walls. Evelyn woke before the children. She always did. She came down the stairs quietly, careful not to let the old wood complain under her steps. The kitchen was still dark, but she didn't need light to find the kettle. She boiled water, made tea. Then, cup in hand, she drifted toward the piano. It was her ritual now, 15 quiet minutes before the house became a moving thing again. But this morning was different. There was something on the piano bench, folded, careful. A piece of lined notebook paper, edges slightly torn like it had been pulled from the middle of something. Evelyn set down her cup. She picked it up with both hands as if it might vanish if she moved too fast. Inside, written in thick pencil strokes, some letters backward, some too large, were 4 words: "You play real pretty." No signature, but Evelyn knew. Mira's handwriting was unmistakable. The backward R had appeared in chalk on the back steps 2 days ago. The Y curled like a question mark. Evelyn didn't smile, not fully, but something in her face changed. Like a door cracked open an inch, just to let in a bit of warmth. She folded the note, placed it back where it had been, then sat. She didn't play right away. She just let her fingers rest on the keys, quiet and still, as if waiting for the right breath. Then she began. Not with scales, not with fragments, a melody, whole, slow and sweet and a little broken in the middle, like it had been kept too long inside. She played it once, then stopped. Behind her, no footsteps, no creaking stair. But she knew someone was listening. That night after dinner, Mira passed by Evelyn on the way to bed. No eye contact, blanket clutched in one hand. But just before rounding the corner, she paused. "Mama used to play too," she whispered. "Only not like you." Evelyn turned. "Did she play sad?" Mira shook her head. "No, fast, so we dance." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's good music too." Mira looked down. "I don't dance anymore." "That's okay," Evelyn said. "Some music isn't for dancing, some's just for being still with." The girl didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. Then softly, "Can you teach me?" Evelyn's voice stayed gentle. "Only if you want." Mira gave a single shy nod, then disappeared up the stairs. Later that evening, Evelyn took the note from the bench and slipped it into the back of her piano journal. The same one she used to keep sketches and half-songs in. She didn't file it. She just placed it between 2 unfinished bars of music like a bookmark made of hope. She didn't need a long sentence, just 4 words scribbled without punctuation, written by a hand still too small to know how much it mattered. The rain came in quiet sheets, tapping against the windows like a visitor too polite to knock. It was still dark when Evelyn heard the footsteps. Not rushed, not panicked, just hesitant. Small. She sat up, already dressed. She hadn't slept much. A feeling had curled itself around her chest earlier in the night, something she couldn't name, only notice. Outside her room, Grace stood in the hallway, arms crossed tight over her chest. "It's Mira," she whispered. "She's warm, like real warm." Evelyn nodded once. No questions, no delay. She followed Grace down the hall into the room shared by the youngest 3. Mira was curled into a tight ball under too many blankets, her cheeks flushed, forehead damp. Her lips moved, but no words made it out. Evelyn crouched beside the bed, back again to that familiar posture close to the floor, eye level with fear. She placed the back of her hand gently against the girl's temple, too hot, but not frighteningly so. She exhaled slowly, not to calm herself, but to set the tone for the room. Everyone else watched. "She's okay," Evelyn said softly. "Her body's just fighting something. That's what it's meant to do." The other children hovered near the door, waiting for a cue permission to stay worried or to go back to bed. "She needs water and rest," Evelyn continued. Grace, can you bring me a cool cloth? Not cold, just cool. Grace vanished without a word. The younger boy fetched a glass without being asked. Evelyn peeled back the layers of blankets, whispering to Mira the whole time, not instruction, not reassurance, just presence. I know it doesn't feel good, she murmured, but your body's smart, it knows what to do. Mira shifted slightly, her brow knitting. Mama? She mumbled. Evelyn didn't freeze, didn't correct her. She just took the girl's hand and held it gently. I'm right here, she said, and for now that was enough. She sat beside the bed for hours, wiping Mira's forehead, holding the glass when the girl had enough strength to sip, changing the cloth, humming a tune too soft to name. The other kids drifted off one by one, some back to sleep, some just lying quietly on couches or curled near the fireplace. Jonas came down once. She all right? Evelyn nodded. Fever, likely viral. We'll keep it steady. He hesitated. You sure you're... I've done this before, she said. He didn't ask when or with who. He just placed a blanket over the boy sleeping on the floor and walked away. By sunrise, Mira's fever had broken. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers stayed curled around Evelyn's wrist, even in sleep. Evelyn didn't move. She just watched the light change across the ceiling. Later that morning, Mira stirred, eyes fluttering open. You stayed, she whispered. I said I would, Evelyn answered. Mira didn't speak again. She just pressed her head into Evelyn's arm and let her breath even out once more. That afternoon, while folding laundry, Evelyn found something tucked into the pocket of her apron. A seashell, pale blue this time, with a tiny crack down one side. Next to it, a scrap of paper, not written, just drawn. A picture. 2 stick figures again. This time, one sat beside the other, both under a blanket. Above them, 3 words in shaky block letters. You didn't leave. Evelyn folded the drawing slowly. She didn't need to cry. She just placed it in the same notebook where the music lived. And for the rest of the day, whenever her hands weren't busy, they stayed close to her chest. The fever was gone by morning, but Mira's voice hadn't fully come back. She was quieter than usual, which was saying something. Moved slower, ate little, stayed close. That afternoon, the sky cleared. The light came in at a soft angle, catching the dust in the hallway like gold waiting to settle. Evelyn sat on the floor with a tin of buttons and a tangled pile of fabric scraps. Mira was beside her, not helping, just near. Her head rested on Evelyn's thigh like a cat who had decided finally that this person could be trusted. They didn't speak. Mira watched Evelyn's fingers sort buttons by color, red, blue, off-white with chipped edges. Outside the window, Jonas was chopping wood, not hurried. Just enough to keep the pile from shrinking too far. Each thud of the axe carried rhythm through the ground. At one point he stopped, looked up. Through the window he saw them, Evelyn. Legs folded beneath her, head bent in focus, Mira curled beside her, holding a button like it was a gem. He didn't come in, but he didn't turn away either. Inside, Evelyn picked up a thread and began stitching 2 patches together, sky blue against checkered flannel. Mira watched the needle move. Her small fingers reached out and gently touched the edge of the fabric. Then, in a voice like breath, so low it barely registered, Grandma? Evelyn didn't react with surprise, didn't correct her, she didn't even pause, she only said soft and sure, I'm right here, sweet pea. Outside, Jonas froze, not from shock, but from something deeper, recognition. He lowered the axe, stood still as if sound itself had asked him to wait. He watched through the glass as Mira leaned in closer, nestling into Evelyn's side. And Evelyn, without fanfare, placed her hand on the girl's back and kept sewing. Later, Jonas would return the axe to its hook without a word. And that night, he would leave an extra log by the fireplace Evelyn always used first. He wouldn't mention the word, wouldn't ask if she heard it, wouldn't say how long it had been since any of them had. But in the quiet that followed, something changed. He no longer looked at Evelyn like a stranger who might stay too long. He looked at her like someone who had already been here for years and maybe just happened to come back. The house was quiet again, not heavy, just still, like it had found a rhythm that didn't need explaining. It was after dinner, the kids upstairs, the last light curling along the floorboards like a sigh. Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't mind. In front of her lay the old handkerchief, Jonas's handkerchief, the one she had repaired weeks ago with gold thread that didn't match. Tonight she unfolded it slowly, smoothing out the creases, feeling the fabric with her fingers. It was softer now, more hers than it had been. She'd been thinking about something for days, not urgently, just letting it sit inside her like a note held too long before being played. Now she picked up the needle, threaded it with pale pink, almost white in the lamplight, and began to stitch. The letter was small. M curved gently in the lower corner, opposite from where the name Anna had been stitched years ago. She didn't try to make it perfect. She didn't trace it first. Just let her hand move the way her heart told it to. It wasn't to claim anything. It wasn't to replace anyone. It was just to honor the moment when a little girl, still warm from fever, had laid her head on Evelyn's leg and whispered a word too sacred to force. Grandma. Evelyn had carried that word with her since, quietly, carefully, like a new seed in the pocket of an old coat. The M wasn't just for Mira. It was for memory, for maybe, for mending. When she finished, she sat back, looked at the cloth in her hands. There it was, the past stitched in fading blue, and the present stitched in soft pink. She didn't need to show it to anyone. She folded it, not sharply this time, but gently, and placed it inside her piano journal, between the drawing Mira had made and the first song she had begun to write again. Not finished, but begun. Jonas passed by the hallway just as she was closing the book. He didn't ask, he didn't even pause, but Evelyn noticed how he slowed just enough, as if his body could feel something changing in the room. He looked toward the stove, toward her empty teacup. Then he said, almost offhand, "She never embroidered anything that wasn't meant to last." Evelyn nodded once. "Neither do I." He gave a soft, and disappeared into the front room. The next morning, when Evelyn came down, she found a small object on the piano bench. A thimble, old, tarnished, but sized for her finger. No note, just the thimble. Set there with intention, set there by someone who didn't need to speak aloud to say, "I saw what you did and I understand." It was just after noon when the knock came. Not soft, not familiar. Jonas opened the door slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, half expecting a neighbor, maybe someone bringing jam or asking about the old boat parts he kept behind the shed. Instead, a man stood on the porch. Late 40s, jacket too new for this town, smile too practiced. He held a clipboard in one hand, a file tucked under one arm. "Jonas Reed?" he asked. Jonas nodded. "I'm Harold Pike. I'm Anna's cousin, from her mother's side." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Long way from Tennessee." "Long time, too," the man said, chuckling like they were catching up at a wedding. "Listen, I don't want to make this awkward, but I've been in touch with a few folks. County office, social services. Heard about the kids, the situation." Jonas stiffened. "I've got paperwork filed for kinship placement," Harold continued. "Specifically, I'm looking to bring Mira home with me. Thought I'd start there, ease it in." He said ease it in like he was recommending a new shampoo. Jonas didn't answer. Harold adjusted his stance. "Look, I know this place meant a lot to Anna, and I get it. You're doing your best, but a man your age, 6 kids out on this cliff, they need..." More. Behind him, Evelyn stepped into the doorway. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she heard Mira's name, and something in her ribcage had tightened instantly. Jonas glanced at her, then back at Harold. "This is Evelyn," he said simply. Harold turned. "Oh, you must be the temp help I heard about, kind of a caretaker situation?" Evelyn smiled thinly. "I wouldn't say temp," she replied. "More like present." Harold gave her a once-over, friendly, slightly dismissive, like she'd wandered in from a church bake sale. "I'm family," he said, tapping the folder. "By law, that counts." Evelyn stepped fully outside now, folding her arms. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "And what exactly do you know about Mira?" Harold blinked. "She's, well, Anna's youngest. Quiet type. Pretty sure she likes drawing." "She likes black keys more than white ones," Evelyn said. "She hums when she dreams, and when she's afraid she hides under the bench by the piano because it's the only space in this house that doesn't echo." Harold didn't reply. "She had a fever last week," Evelyn continued. "Wouldn't let go of my wrist all night. Her first full sentence in 2 months was whispered into the fold of my sweater. And last night she laughed in her sleep. First time." Jonas didn't move, just listened. Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, I get that you're attached. That's natural. But this isn't about—" "It's not about you," Evelyn cut in, voice level. "Or what the papers say. It's about whether you'll be there the third night when she wets the bed and doesn't tell you. It's about whether you'll know that her drawings, they're not random. She only uses yellow when she's hopeful." Harold opened his mouth, then closed it. Evelyn took a step forward. "You may be family on paper, but this house knows her breath, and I—" She placed a hand over her chest. "I know the weight of her silence better than you know the sound of your own voice." The wind shifted, salt in the air. Harold looked away first. "I'll come back after speaking with the county," he muttered, turning. Evelyn didn't stop him, but she watched until his car disappeared down the long dirt road. Only then did she exhale. Jonas, still silent, leaned on the porch rail. "She's never said that much out loud before," he said. "Neither have I," Evelyn replied. Inside the house, Mira sat behind the curtain. She had heard everything. She didn't come out. But that night, when Evelyn went to her room, there was a single drawing taped to the door, a lighthouse, and a woman standing in front of it. No words, just light beaming through her. The rain returned that evening, a soft, steady curtain that made the windows hum and the air smell of salt and soil. The children had gone to bed early, too quiet after the tension of Harold's visit. The house felt heavy not in grief, but in remembering. Jonas sat by the fireplace, the logs popping gently. He held a mug but didn't drink from it. Evelyn entered with a folded blanket. She moved as she always did, not asking, not intruding, just being where she was needed. He gestured toward a far corner of the room. "Used to be her spot, Anna's." Evelyn followed his eyes. A chair sat there, low to the ground, its back slightly frayed. It was covered in an old knitted blanket, faded mauve, with a few threads pulled loose. "I haven't touched it," Jonas said. "Not since." Evelyn walked toward it, slow. "She liked sitting low," he continued, voice barely above the fire crackle. "Said the view made the room look taller. Kids always curled up at her feet, especially Mira. That chair knew her heartbeat." Evelyn crouched beside it. Close now, she could see the dust, layered thin but stubborn. A quiet kind of timekeeper. "She'd read in it every night," Jonas added. "Didn't matter what kind of day we'd had, good, bad, screaming, crying, that chair meant the day was done." Evelyn didn't say a word. She unfolded the blanket slowly, lifted it off the chair. Underneath, the fabric was softer than she expected. Worn, yes, but warm. Lived in. She left the blanket folded across her arm. Then she stood, went to the kitchen, returned with a damp cloth, and without fanfare, she began to clean. No asking, no ceremony, just slow, careful motions like she was not wiping away a memory but making space for it to breathe again. Jonas didn't stop her, didn't look away. He just watched. "She died in that chair," he said after a while. Evelyn paused, then continued wiping. "She asked me not to move her," he went on. "Said she wanted to hear the kids fighting over bedtime one more time, even if she couldn't get up to kiss them goodnight." The cloth paused again. This time, Evelyn placed her other hand on the armrest, steadying herself. Not because she was unsteady, but because the moment asked for weight. "She made me promise not to cover it with sadness," Jonas said. "Just not yet." Evelyn looked up, met his eyes. "You kept the promise," he exhaled through his nose. "Too well." She gave a soft nod, then went back to wiping. Not scrubbing, just lifting dust like she was uncovering a buried breath. When she finished, she draped the blanket back over the chair, not fully, just across the backrest. Inviting, not closing. Jonas stood. He didn't say thank you, but he sat in the chair for the first time in years, and Evelyn took the seat across from him. They didn't speak. They just listened to the rain fill in the space between. The wind had calmed, but the sea still whispered in long, rolling breaths. Afternoon light spilled through the windows, soft and slanted, the kind that made everything look a little more permanent than it was. Evelyn was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for biscuits when Grace stepped in. No knock, no announcement, just a folded paper in her hands and a guarded look on her face. "Don't make a big deal," Grace said quickly. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, not smiling. "All right." The girl placed the paper on the table and backed away half a step, as if afraid it might catch fire. Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel, then unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing colored pencil on notebook paper, the lines slightly uneven but certain. 6 children, 2 adults, a lighthouse in the background. The sea bright blue, the sky a little too pink to be real. One of the adults had white hair pulled in a bun, the other wore a flannel shirt and held a small child on his shoulders. Underneath, written in block letters, were 3 words. "This is us." Evelyn said nothing. She looked at Grace. The girl's arms were crossed, chin slightly lifted. "I didn't show it to Dad yet," Grace muttered. "Didn't want him to think I was replacing anyone." "You're not," Evelyn said simply. Grace hesitated. "Do you think it's okay to draw it like that, even if it's not official?" Evelyn folded the drawing again, careful not to crease the people. "There's a difference between paper and truth," she said. "One lasts longer. The other matters more." Grace looked down, cheeks flushed. "I just wanted it to be somewhere real." Evelyn nodded once, then took the picture and walked out the kitchen door. Grace followed, silent. They crossed the yard, boots crunching softly over gravel and grass. The lighthouse loomed ahead, not towering but steady. Familiar. At the door of the lighthouse, Evelyn paused. She didn't ask for permission. She just pulled a small piece of clear tape from her apron pocket kept for recipes or torn pages, and affixed the drawing to the wooden door, right at eye level, not hidden, not high above, right where anyone who entered would see. Then she stepped back. Grace stood beside her, blinking. "You didn't even ask." "No," Evelyn said, "because it already belonged here." They stood like that for a long moment, just the two of them, a girl brave enough to draw what she missed, and a woman wise enough to place it where it could live. Later that evening, Jonas passed the lighthouse on his way to the shed. He saw the drawing, didn't stop, didn't remove it. But that night, at dinner, he called for seconds on the biscuits, and when Evelyn passed him the plate, their fingers touched briefly, intentionally, and he didn't pull away. It was just past 4 when Evelyn woke. No storm, no scream, just something wrong with the silence. She sat up, heart steady, not racing, just listening. Then she heard it, faint, hesitant. A sequence of notes, not quite clumsy, not quite fluent. Piano, but not scales, not something she'd shown. This was different. Evelyn rose, slipped into her robe and moved barefoot down the hallway. The boards didn't creak this time, as if the house, too, had agreed not to interrupt. When she reached the living room, she stopped at the edge of the doorway. Mira was at the piano, alone, sitting tall, shoulders hunched slightly forward in concentration. Her fingers, small but sure, moved with cautious confidence. She wasn't playing something she'd memorized, she was playing something she was finding. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just watched. The melody came in fragments, uneven but alive. Sometimes it paused, as if the girl needed to ask the keys a question. Sometimes it rushed like a memory had outrun her. But it was hers, not Evelyn's, not her mother's, just Mira's, and it was beautiful in a way only unpolished things can be. When the girl reached the end, if it was an end, she didn't press the final key. She just rested her hands on her lap and stared straight ahead. Evelyn stepped into the room. Mira didn't flinch. "I didn't wake you, did I?" she asked, eyes still on the keys. "No," Evelyn said softly. "You called me." Mira looked up, surprised. "With the music?" Evelyn nodded. "Was it okay?" "It was yours." The girl tilted her head. "I didn't know all the right notes." "Sometimes the right ones don't matter," Evelyn replied. "Only the ones you mean." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that came after sound, not absence, but aftermath. Mira finally slid off the bench. "I dreamed it last week. I didn't remember all of it, just the shape." "That's where most good songs start," Evelyn said. She sat at the piano, patted the bench beside her. Mira hesitated, then climbed back up. "Want to show me where it began?" Evelyn asked. The girl placed her fingers on the keys again, slower this time. Evelyn didn't correct, didn't guide. She just listened. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't teaching. She was learning. When the last note faded into the wood of the room, Evelyn reached over and played just one chord beneath it. Mira looked at her, startled. "You knew where it went?" "I guessed." "Can we write it down?" Mira asked. "Only if we're brave enough to forget it first." Mira smiled, uncertain but proud. "You'll remember it though, right?" Evelyn looked down at the girl's hands. "I won't need to. It's already in you." They sat there side by side, no more music, just the feeling of it still in the air. Later that morning, Evelyn returned to her room and took out the journal where she kept songs never finished. She turned to a blank page. At the top she wrote, "Mira's song," and beneath it, instead of notes, she drew a single seashell, then closed the book, not to forget, but to let it breathe. The tide had gone out, leaving behind long stretches of wet sand that shimmered like silver under the late afternoon sky. Evelyn sat on the bench near the fence, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. It was the kind of cool that didn't bite, just reminded you to wear sleeves. Behind her, the lighthouse stood quiet, its light off for now, resting. Jonas approached with 2 apples in one hand, offered her one without a word. She took it. They ate in silence for a while, the kind that came easily between them now. No need to fill it. Then Evelyn spoke, eyes still on the distant horizon. "I've been wondering something," she said. Jonas didn't answer, just waited. She took a breath. Not nervous, just careful. Should I go? Jonas looked at her now. Go? I've stayed longer than planned. I was meant to help for a few days, then a few more, but now... She trailed off. He didn't speak. I never wanted to overstay, she added, or confuse the kids, or confuse myself. Jonas turned the apple slowly in his palm. You think you're confusing anyone? I don't know, Evelyn said. I think I've started to matter, and that scares me more than being forgotten ever did. The wind picked up slightly. The sea shifted its rhythm. Jonas bit into his apple again, chewed, swallowed, then finally. Do the kids want you gone? No. Do I? Evelyn turned. He was looking at her now, straight, level. No, he said. Silence again. Then he added, You keep thinking this was supposed to be temporary. Maybe it was. But that doesn't mean it still is. She let that sit. But it's not my place, she said, softer now. Jonas leaned back, eyes half-lidded toward the waves. You make breakfast, he said. You fix things no one asked you to. You remember who likes crusts cut off and who only eats soup from the blue bowl. You don't ask them to love you, and still somehow, they do. Evelyn blinked. That sounds a lot like a place to me, he said. She didn't cry, but she stopped blinking for a long moment. Then, and you, what do you call it? Jonas shrugged as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Home got quieter when Anna left and somehow louder again when you came, not in a bad way, just less hollow. Evelyn looked away toward the lighthouse. It still feels borrowed. So does everything that matters, Jonas said, even time. They sat for a long while, the apples gone, the sun lower. When they finally stood to return inside, Evelyn didn't repeat the question, and Jonas didn't need to say anything more. But when she reached the door, she found her coat washed, repaired, and hung on the hook by the kitchen next to the kids. That was the answer. Not a sentence, a gesture, a place made for her between others. The house had quieted early that night. No storms, no questions, just soft footsteps and a final creak of floorboards upstairs. Evelyn sat alone in the front room, a cup of tea untouched beside her, pencil in hand. The piano journal lay open on her lap, pages half filled with fragments and flourishes. Some dates scribbled in the corner. Others just bare space, but tonight she turned to a fresh page and began. Slow at first, title first, where the light stays, then a key signature, C major, simple, open, no accidentals to hide behind. The melody had been with her for days now, ever since she woke to Mira's music. It wasn't Mira's theme, not exactly, but it carried the shape of her. Of all of them. The opening was soft, like fog on the sea. Then a rise like children's feet on old stairs, then a moment that hesitated. One held breath before falling gently into something deeper. Each bar came slow but sure, not perfect, not polished, but real. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't writing for anyone's approval. She was trying to leave something behind, something that would stay when she didn't. It wasn't about dying. It wasn't about leaving tomorrow. It was about giving shape to what had been lived. After 30 minutes, she paused, leaned back, read the measures again, and saw them for what they were. The way Mira touched the black keys like secrets. The way Grace peeled apples without bruising them. The way Jonas always tapped twice on the porch railing before heading inside. All of it was there, folded into staves, hidden in rhythm. She added a final note, low, warm, held, then closed the book. But she didn't tuck it away. She walked to the piano, opened the lid, and placed the journal right there, centered, deliberate. When the others came down in the morning, they'd see it, not as a message, not as a performance, just as something offered. The house didn't need big declarations. It remembered the little ones. Before heading to bed, Evelyn reached into the drawer where Jonas kept old postcards and matches. She took a small scrap of paper and wrote 5 words. Play it when it's quiet. She folded the note, set it inside the cover, and turned off the lamp. As she passed the hallway, she paused to look once more. The piano sat still, but the air around it felt charged, like something had begun and finished at the same time. The letter arrived with the morning tide, tucked in among the groceries and local flyers Jonas brought back from town. Its envelope was cream-colored, corners slightly bent. The handwriting on the front was instantly familiar. Nora. Evelyn held it in her hand for a long moment before opening it. She hadn't heard from her sister in nearly a year. Not since the terse Christmas card with a photograph of Nora's grandchildren and a note that read, "Hope you're keeping busy." She sat at the kitchen table, waited for the kettle to boil, then opened it without ceremony. "Ev, I heard through Mrs. Redding that you're still out by the sea." I wasn't sure if it was true, but then I remembered you always did leave quietly. The house is quiet now, after Ben. I've done my best, but my knees are giving out, and the garden's not what it was. I find myself wishing someone would just come sit and hum in the evenings. No pressure. I know your reasons. I know you don't owe me anything. But if you're tired of the wind, tired of salt in your shoes and other people's children in your arms, there's always a chair here. Love. Nora. Evelyn folded the letter once, then again. She didn't sigh, didn't cry, she just sat there, letting the words settle like silt in her chest. It was not an order, not a guilt trap, just a hand reaching out across time and silence. From the front room, she could hear Mira humming, a half-remembered tune, one of Evelyn's maybe, or maybe the girl's own. Grace walked through the kitchen with a book, glanced at Evelyn, noticed the letter. "Everything okay?" she asked. Evelyn nodded, almost reflexively. "Just from my sister," she said. "She wants me to visit." Grace tilted her head. "You gonna go?" Evelyn smiled softly. "I haven't decided." She didn't add, "I don't know which life is mine anymore." That afternoon, Evelyn stood by the back fence and watched the sea. It was restless, not angry, not calm, just full of something it hadn't yet let go. She thought of Nora's house, the porch with peeling white paint, the sound of spoons in the sugar jar, the chair by the window that always faced west. Then she thought of here, of muddy boots by the door. Jonas's quiet knock before entering any room. Mira's sketchbook left open on the floor, the music still sitting on the piano, waiting. Evelyn pulled the letter from her pocket again, reread it. No demand, just invitation. "If you're tired." She wasn't sure if she was. That night, she didn't play the piano. She just sat beside it, watching the firelight flicker against the keys. Jonas passed behind her at one point, saw the letter on her lap. He didn't ask, just nodded once. Acknowledgement, not interference. Before going to bed, Evelyn wrote a note of her own, small, tucked into her journal beside Mira's drawing. It read, "I said I wouldn't stay forever, but I never said how long enough was." The morning was clear, painfully so, no clouds to soften the sky, no fog to hide behind. Harold had returned. This time with paperwork, with signatures, with state officials waiting in a muted car down the hill. Jonas hadn't spoken much that morning, just fixed the fence gate twice. Grace stayed in her room. The younger ones hovered in corners, pretending not to know. Only Mira watched openly, silently, her eyes following Evelyn like a shadow. Evelyn didn't fight, didn't argue. She had known deep down this day would come. Not because anyone deserved it, but because some systems moved regardless of love. She stood near the front steps, coat buttoned all the way up, scarf tied tight. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from cold. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll write. I'll call," Evelyn said, mostly to herself. "They know," Jonas answered. The kids lined up awkwardly, not instructed to do so, but drawn to her like planets around gravity. Evelyn crouched one by one. She didn't promise the impossible. She didn't say, "I'll be back tomorrow." She just looked at them, each in turn, and found the right word. To the oldest boy, "You're not too old to need kindness." To the twin girls, "Stay weird. The world doesn't need more same." To Grace, just a touch on the cheek and a look that said, "You saw me first." When she reached Mira, she couldn't speak. Mira had something in her hand, folded small, fist tight around it. She took Evelyn's hand, slowly, deliberately, and pressed the object into her palm, a handkerchief. The same one Evelyn had mended months ago, but now it was different. 6 new symbols had been embroidered around the edges, tiny, each in a different thread color. A seashell, a black key, a biscuit, a lighthouse, a star, and the final one right in the corner, an M. The threads were uneven, some barely holding, but they were there. Evelyn looked down, speech caught somewhere between throat and chest. Mira didn't explain, didn't need to. She just whispered, "Now it's yours," and hugged her, not quickly, not tight, just completely. When she pulled back, her eyes were dry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because some goodbyes don't leak from the eyes. They sit heavier, lower, in the chest. Evelyn rose slowly, hands still curled around the cloth. As she stepped toward the car, she looked back one last time. The children stood in a loose row, Mira a step forward, Jonas behind them, arms crossed, jaw set, as if holding the whole house in place. The lighthouse stood tall above them, silent but certain. And for a moment, Evelyn didn't feel like she was leaving. She felt like something in her was being left behind, not lost, left on purpose, for them to keep. The city was loud in a different way, not chaotic, just full of footsteps and engines, phone calls and clinking cups. Evelyn walked slower than most people on the sidewalk, and she didn't mind the occasional bump of a shoulder. She wasn't in a hurry. She had been back 3 days. Nora's apartment was neat, filled with the scent of thyme and lemon oil. They'd shared coffee each morning, spoken of small things, swollen joints, broken zippers, television shows neither had finished. There was kindness, familiarity, but no music. That morning, Evelyn stepped out alone. A small Saturday market had gathered near the park. Booths of bread and candles, children with painted faces, street musicians tuning half-worn guitars. It was all warm and wide in its own way. She passed a corner where a young man sat with a keyboard balanced across his lap, plugged into a tiny amp. A black case lay open for coins. He wore a threadbare scarf and fingerless gloves, eyes closed as he played. At first, Evelyn didn't notice the tune. Then a few notes in, she stopped. The melody came in soft, slow, just like she wrote it. Where the light stays, it wasn't exactly the same. The rhythm stretched in places. Some notes fell sooner, others hung longer, but it was undeniably hers. She stood still, not breathing. The man didn't look up. He played the opening, then swelled into the second phrase, the part she wrote after Mira's song, the part that rose like light on old floorboards. A woman dropped a coin in his case. A child swayed. No one else seemed to know what the music was, but Evelyn did. She stepped closer, hands wrapped around the cloth in her coat pocket, the one with 6 embroidered signs. When the song ended, she waited until the last note finished echoing into the street. Then she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, voice low. "Where did you learn that?" The man looked up, surprised. Young, maybe early 20s, kind eyes. "Oh, that one?" he said. "I found the sheet music online, actually. No name on it, just the title. Where the Light Stays. Thought it was pretty." Evelyn smiled gently. It is. I've played it here for weeks, he added. People always stop when I do, not sure why. It's not flashy or anything. It's not supposed to be, she said. He tilted his head. Did you write it? No, she said softly, then paused. I just know where it came from. He nodded, respectful. As she turned to leave, he added, Hey, I hope whoever wrote it knows how many people stop for it. She looked back, and for the first time in days, her smile reached her eyes. They do, she said, and she kept walking. Not lighter, but steadier. The road curved the same way it always had. Gravel kicked under the tires. The trees leaned in, still bare from winter, but not brittle, just waiting. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat of a borrowed car, her hands resting on the cloth in her lap. The handkerchief, still folded, still holding. Jonas had offered to come pick her up, but she declined. Said she needed to arrive under her own steam, even if someone else was driving. Now, as the hill crested, the familiar shape of the lighthouse rose into view. Not dramatic, just steady, like it had never moved, and the gate, open, not swung wide, just unlatched. Evelyn stepped out. The wind smelled the same, sea salt and cedar, faint smoke from the kitchen stove. She walked slowly, suitcase wheels bumping against the path, but she didn't mind. Every bump reminded her that she wasn't drifting. She was returning. At the porch, she paused. No one came running. No voices called out, but the front door creaked just slightly, as if it had been waiting for her hand on the knob. She stepped inside, and nothing had changed. The boots by the wall, the drawing still taped to the lighthouse door, a little faded but not removed. The piano closed, but a single seashell sat on top. She left her suitcase near the stairs and walked into the kitchen. Jonas was there, slicing carrots like it was any other afternoon. He didn't look up right away. When he did, he just nodded once. You're just in time, he said. The soup needed time. Evelyn smiled softly. You remembered. I remember everything, he said. No one asked why she was back. No one asked how long she'd stay. In the front room, one of the twins looked up from a book, saw her, and gave a brief wave, like she'd just stepped out to check the mail and now was home. Later, Mira came down the stairs, eyes sleepy from a nap. She didn't speak. She just walked up to Evelyn, took her hand, and led her toward the living room, to the chair in the corner, the one Anna once claimed, the one Evelyn had wiped clean months ago. It was empty, not by accident. Evelyn sat down. Mira crawled beside her, one hand still resting on the cloth in Evelyn's lap. Did you see the music? She asked softly. I heard it, Evelyn answered. Out there. Mira nodded like that made perfect sense. We play it on Sundays, when it's quiet. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The chair creaked a little as she leaned back, not from age, but from recognition. A life, folding into place. Jonas passed by the doorway again, wiping his hands. He didn't ask what came next, didn't need to. She was here. The sun had begun to fall sideways across the water, casting gold through the living room windows. Everything looked warmer than it was, like memory had softened the edges of the day. Evelyn stood at the threshold of the kitchen, cloth in hand. She had carried it across counties, cities, months of silence. Folded it during train rides, held it in parks, placed it under her pillow once or twice. And now, it was time. Jonas sat at the kitchen table reading a weather report, not because he needed it, but because it was a habit, the kind that made the day feel stable. Evelyn walked over quietly, didn't ask, didn't wait. She placed the cloth on the table in front of him. He looked at it for a long moment, then slowly set down the paper. unfolded it once, then again. The handkerchief opened like a soft story, still holding the old seam she had mended, still carrying the gold thread that didn't match, still bearing the pink M she'd stitched for Mira. And now, 6 new initials had been added, tiny, in their own corners, each with a different color thread. GLNRME. Jonas traced them with his finger, slow, careful, then stopped at the center, right on the seam, where 2 threads crossed, one from the past, one newly added, forming a barely visible X. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. But after a long silence, she said, "I carried it when I didn't know where to go. Thought maybe it belonged with me. Turns out..." Jonas looked up. "I was just holding it for a while." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need her to explain whether she was staying forever or only passing through again. He just reached out, both hands, and took the cloth, held it, not gently, firmly, like it was something alive. He didn't speak, but his thumb pressed lightly against the corner with the E. Evelyn smiled, that quiet kind that barely lifts the mouth, but fills the whole face. Then, without breaking the silence, she turned back toward the living room. Dinner wasn't ready yet. The kids were still upstairs, but for a moment the house felt full, as if someone had just finished a song and let the last note ring long into the air. The house was quiet in that sacred way it got after the dishes were washed, the lights dimmed, and everyone had found their corners of peace. Evelyn sat at the piano bench. She wasn't playing, just resting her fingers lightly on the keys, like one might rest a hand on an old friend's shoulder. The journal still lay open on the stand, where the light stays, ink slightly faded at the corners. She didn't expect anyone, didn't call for anyone. She was simply sitting with the silence. Then came the softest sound, a bare foot against the wood floor. She didn't turn. Mira appeared beside her. Hair still damp from her bath, sleeves too long for her arms, eyes alert but calm. Without speaking, the girl climbed up onto the bench. There wasn't quite room, but they shifted. Evelyn moved slightly to the left. Mira leaned slightly to the right, and they found a rhythm in how their shoulders touched. No one said a word. Mira looked down at the keys, then pressed one. Middle C. Evelyn answered. A harmony just above. Another key, then another. The left hand followed. No rush, no counting, just listening. They didn't play the song from start to finish. It wasn't that kind of moment. They played pieces, phrases. Mira tried something new, Evelyn responded. Sometimes they stopped altogether, not from a mistake, but from the need to feel the pause. They smiled, briefly, then continued. The light from the window was nearly gone, but the keys still reflected it in patches, like fireflies that had wandered inside. After a while, Evelyn lifted her hands, let Mira continue alone. The girl did. Her touch was still unsure, still young, but there was shape now, intention, a voice. When the final note lingered, low, soft, not perfect, Evelyn nodded once. Not as approval, but as recognition. Mira looked up, eyes steady. "I didn't get it all right," she whispered. Evelyn leaned in, forehead touching the girl's temple. "You got it true." They sat there for a while longer. The bench creaked once, like an old friend shifting in its seat. Outside, the lighthouse blinked, its slow, certain pulse washing over the yard. And in the space between the notes, between the years, between the people they'd been and the ones they were becoming, there was no need to say anything else. The light had stayed.